Welcome back in, everybody. Another edition of the First and Orange podcast. It's a wild card edition. The Broncos back in the playoffs for the first time since Super Bowl 50. Ryan McFadden there. He was in like middle school or something when that happened. Troy Renck there. He was on the beat when that happened. I don't even know where I was, somewhere in between those two things. It's been a while. The Broncos are back in the playoffs. Ryan, Troy, welcome back. The season rolls on toward Buffalo this weekend. I guess just first things first, Troy. I mean, you've covered every twist and turn and, deep, dark well since Super Bowl 50. What was it like watching the Broncos actually clinch a playoff spot on Sunday against the not exactly full strength Kansas City Chiefs?
Yeah, listen, the reserve, they probably could have used Taylor Swift's backup dancers, would have been a better game, but that's not their fault. Listen, I don't want to hear about the Bengals. They lost to the Patriots. I don't want to hear about the Dolphins. They can't play in cold weather, so shut it. The Broncos won 10 games. Any of us who've covered the last 8 years will tell you that's an achievement. They've had one winning season in that this year. They've had one playoff berth. But what does it mean, Parker? The NFL is better when the Broncos are good. And I say that I didn't grow up a Broncos fan. I've lived here my entire life. For 35 years, they had more Super Bowl berths than losing seasons.
Yeah.
This was a premier franchise. Not, once every decade they're good. They were not unlike the Baltimore franchise that Ryan is familiar with, where every year you thought this could be the year. Now they don't necessarily win it, but you go in with the expectation they could. So for me, watching it happen, it was like finally restore them, return to relevancy, restore sanity of a once proud franchise. And maybe they get smoked. Who cares? It's just finally it feels like the wheels are back on, the train is back on the track. And that as we go forward with this Sean Payton, Bo Nix, Walton Penner ownership group, that, now we start talking in terms of when could they win a Super Bowl? That's not necessarily next year. Now things are starting to make sense because you got your quarterback, you got your coach, you got ownership, you got a young core of defensive players. So what did I think? Like, thank goodness, that the Broncos are back, and the NFL is better when the Broncos are good.
Ryan, we talked, sort of like, especially from the time they came out of that, the back-to-back losses to Baltimore and Kansas City, and then they won 4 straight and got to 9-5. Obviously, a big part of the conversation has been about just exceeding expectations. And we roundtabled about this yesterday in the print format. But when you think about just sort of what led to this sort of surprising season to everybody except for, the players will tell you not them, but to almost everybody outside the building, obviously they've far exceeded expectations. So where does your mind go, like when you start thinking about sort of like the bedrock reasons as to why that happened?
I think it's two things. It starts with the defense. Like the defense was much better than a lot of us anticipated. Going into the season, we knew you were going to get out of Pass Surtain, but how would Nick Bonito become an every down edge rusher? We didn't see that last year. What about the middle linebacker situation? How would overall, like, they've really? I thought the defense is probably one of the biggest reasons why is because they just 63 sacks and led the league in pressures. That's the key right there. They just wreaked havoc in the backfield throughout the entire year. Nick Bonito becoming a potential All-Pro, Pat Surtain, the Defensive Player of the Year candidate. Brandon Jones is like we talk so much about the pass rush, but him, like Brandon Jones, he comes in filling in for Justin Simmons, who's one of the best safeties in the NFL, and he plays solid football. And you got to get a testament to, I say, front office bringing guys in that fits what Vance Joseph wants to do on defense. I think that's the key. And that's something like in sports, like we don't really like that should be more credited to is like, you got to bring in guys that fit your system. If you don't bring in guys that doesn't fit your system, you can have the top talent out there, but it just doesn't work, especially in football. And that's what we see here with the Broncos. They just brought in guys that fit what they want to do defensively, and it's worked beautifully. And the next thing is they have a great quarterback and head coach relationship.
Yeah.
That's another thing. You can tell Sean Payton and Bo Nix they're made for each other. Now it took some time to get to this point, but But during that little middle of the season stretch where I believe Bo Nix had like 19 touchdown passes, 2 picks or something like that, that right there showed that, all right, this is his guy. And that's the reason why they won 10 games. You didn't see that last year with Russ. And that's not a knock to who Russ is as a player, and that's not a knock to who Sean Payton is as a coach. But that chemistry was not meshing at all. And you saw that with the offense. And now you go into this year with Bo Nix. There were still question marks about, the pieces around him. They're even going to this game. There's still question marks about the pieces around Bo Nix, especially from a running back standpoint, from a tight end standpoint. But he still got 34 total touchdowns and 29 more passing and close to 4,000 yards in the air. So, and I think that's right there is a testament to, the play caller has his guy, and that's those two things right there has been the reason the Broncos are at 10 wins, and they're playing football this weekend, meaningful football in January.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I thought, Ryan, you made a good point the other day, too, that like there's a bunch of guys who have had either breakout seasons or the best years of their career so far. I mean, you can go up and down the defense. Like, we knew what kind of player Pat Surtain was, but he's taken his game even to another level. Zach Allen's playing the best football of his career. I think John Franklin Myers probably, might be his best season. Certainly, like, the guys who you weren't quite sure what it was going to look like, the combination of PJ Locke and Brandon Jones at safety, Riley Moss, like all of these guys have broken out. Like Jonathan Cooper and Nick Bonito both playing the best ball of their career, 5 sacks apiece from Jonah Ellis and Dondre Tillman, like just sort of up and down the defensive side of the ball. You've gotten meaningful contributions. And in a lot of cases, like, contributions that you probably didn't quite expect. Or it was like, hey, what's the median outcome? What's the best case outcome? Like a lot of guys on defense, you're closer to the best case outcome than you could have probably realistically expected for just like an across the board result. So obviously it's been good. It got a little hairy there down the stretch. You lose the two of your 3 chances to clinch, but I don't know. It was about 5 minutes into the game on Sunday where you thought like, okay, this isn't going to be much of an issue. So now, they come back, and I thought it was interesting, guys, listening to like Mike McGlinchey talk on Monday even, and the post-game locker room had some of this too, just the energy in the building. I think that's one thing that's like maybe hard to, fans I'm sure probably feel it in their own way. But, Mike McGlinchey was saying just like even training staff, people that have worked in the building for a long time that haven't had this week of work in a long time, that haven't had this feeling in a long time, like there's just an energy around the building, which I'm sure we're recording a day early this week. It's Wednesday morning. I'm sure, you'll sense that going over there the next 3 days. But it really is like, it's not just about playing in a wild card game or the playoff check or anything like that. Like there is something special in the NFL about being in the tournament and just being there this week that I think probably goes a little bit underappreciated, Troy.
Yeah, I mean, you have more than a puncher's chance. Nobody's going to pick them really outside of diehard Bronco fans and people in that building to win. But because of what Ryan mentioned, their pass rush, their ability to create takeaways, Buffalo hasn't been playing particularly well this last month of the season. Their defense is vulnerable, and can the Broncos stop the running backs in the passing game? And they have a chance, and they just won in Buffalo last year with a bunch of these guys. Now they got a little lucky with the too many men on the field penalty, but the reality is they played well in Buffalo and won. And it was the formula you can pull off an upset, which is a bunch of takeaways, slow the game down, run the ball just enough. So, yeah, just the energy of when you're in a postseason and you're on a good team, seasons go by in a blink. It's not entirely different than a beat writer. When you're covering a bad team, it just feels like I covered 15 Rockies teams, 3 had winning seasons, and you get to August and you just feel it. You look up and you're like, man, there is 6 more weeks or 8 more weeks in a football season. When a team starts winning, this season has flown by. I mean, I can't tell. Some of the Vic Fangio seasons, the Hackett seasons. It doesn't mean those seasons aren't interesting to cover. Hackett certainly was because it was just a daily train wreck. But when you start winning, there is the real thing. I know people. Parker and Ryan, they roll their eyes at the idea of momentum, but there is momentum in sports and life. I've lived it as a player, as a coach, as a writer. It really does exist. Is it hard to quantify? Yes, it is. But you'd be insane not to admit that it can push people, and it allows them to reach their potential because it's positivity that's around everything. Now it comes with pressure, and the flip side is our consequence. But man, it's just such a cool thing to be talking about. Are they going to overlook? Are they going to be able to deal with prosperity? That's a much better conversation than should they have tanked and got the number pick of the draft.
Yeah, definitely. No, it's interesting because I mean, like obviously people they're not probably overly concerned with like our experiences covering the team, but there was this moment last week on Friday. Ryan and I were laughing about this in the media workroom of like there was a chance, not a good chance, and then obviously given the way Kansas City played, it ended up being not that way. But like on Friday, you're sitting there going like, oh man, like this could actually be the last time you're over here for a practice this year. Like if they lose, they're out. And there wasn't really like, for as much as the screws tightened and as much as there was pressure to win that game, obviously, Ryan, it didn't seem like anybody on the team thought that was the last time they'd be over there. And that's the thing about this time of year, right? Is like you have, the players on the team and the coaches and all of that, like they operate entirely with the mentality of like, oh no, we're going to win. And then we'll be back next week and getting ready for the next one. And I'm sure that you'll sense that this week too, although obviously playing against a fully armed Buffalo team on the road in the cold, at playoff speed's obviously a different conversation than the week 18 game, but it just is like, it's going to be very interesting, I think, Ryan, to see how, a relatively untested group in the playoffs, and certainly a group that's untested, as the Broncos playing in the playoffs, handles what's going to be an environment like which they haven't seen so far on Sunday up around Lake Erie.
Yes, it's going to be insane given the fact that Buffalo has a crazy fan base and they show out for all their games. It's going to be even crazier for a wild card game. But yeah, like you spoke on their mentality, and I think that's part of the reason why they've been successful as well. Like they believe that they're winners, and one person, like you could point to an example to is Zach Allen. Whenever you ask Zach Allen after a certain loss, he will always say the sky's not falling. He had just this calmness about him, where it's like, okay, we got our bus beat by Baltimore, but we're not. It's okay. We got next week. And same with when they lost to the Chiefs on the road, like they were hurt because it was right there. Like if it wasn't for that blocked field goal, most of that kick is probably going in. They probably had one of the biggest upsets of the year. Yep. And in the same moment, you got to give credit to Bo Nix because like he led them down the field in a very pressured moment. But even after that game, their mindset, like they never had that like mentality, like, yeah, this is over, or the sky is falling, or whatnot. So it's gonna be interesting to see how they handle this type of environment. Obviously, it's a playoff, so it's a much different vibe and much different pressure compared to the regular season. But you have a guy in Sean Payton who seems like he's instilled a lot of confidence in his team and a lot of trust and belief in these guys, and I think they're going to carry that into the game.
Troy nailed it after that Kansas City game with the, like that was the moment that, I think you wrote after that, Troy, that would, sort of spur the playoff run after that field goal was blocked. And it's funny, Zach Allen said to me, I think it was after they blew the lead against the Chargers in Los Angeles on Thursday Night Football. He said to me, he's like, yeah, if the Kansas City loss didn't break us, then this won't either. And we'll figure it out. And I mean, there's something to that, right? Like you have to find a way. And that was one of the sort of seminal, stretches of the season was losing to Baltimore and Kansas City and losing to Kansas City in the fashion that they did, and then bouncing back and winning 4 straight after that to get from 5-5 to 9-5. So obviously there's a lot, that goes into building a successful run over 17 games, specifically with Buffalo, Ryan. I mean, obviously you start with Josh Allen, but when you dig in just to the numbers, I mean, you're talking about a team, they've got 32 rushing touchdowns, most in the NFL. Josh Allen has 12 of those. They defensively, they're balanced. They've given up the fewest sacks. I think Josh Allen's only been sacked 14 times this year. I mean, Bo Nix is a tough guy to sack, and he's taken 24. So 14 sacks for Josh Allen. It's a good offensive line. Obviously, they have weapons. Maybe not like the way that you think about that offense, traditionally, but just with where they're at. Khalil Shakir's turned himself into a really good player. But they've got balance offensively, and then they take the ball away. There's 17.5% turnover rate, I think, on defense, best in the NFL. So this is quite a challenge. If you're the Broncos, like where do you start? Like how do you start to put together the blueprint for pulling off an upset?
It's a tough matchup because, like you said, they are very balanced offensively.
Yeah,
and they're led by one of the best quarterbacks and a potential MVP candidate. And this, like looking at the numbers, like they don't have an 1,000-yard receiver, but they have 9 players with at least 250 yards. So he's spreading that ball around. So it's not like, all right, you neutralize wide receiver number 1 and boom, you have a chance. No, he's getting into James Cook. He's getting into Ty Johnson. He's getting into both of his tight ends. He's getting to Shakur. Like there's so much to worry about. Then you have to worry about Josh Allen and his running ability.
Yeah.
We saw that in Baltimore, where it's like that, how they had to worry about different pieces on the offensive side in that Week 9 matchup. That really struggled. And one thing about Denver's defense, they play a lot of man.
Yep.
And they use that to create pressure. However, Josh Allen is really good against man coverage. Like when you look at the numbers, I believe he's like second in the league in touchdowns against man coverage this year. So yeah, this is going to be a very intriguing matchup. I think this kind of match is going to put a little bit more pressure on. And Troy, you mentioned this a couple days ago. It's going to put some pressure on their inside linebackers in coverage, because you got to have to stop James Cook. Like he's gonna get his yards, but like he's another guy that Josh Allen relies on the passing game, and Denver's linebackers have not been good in coverage this year. They have not been good in trying to contain those running backs in the passing game. So that's right there is going to be one of my keys, like to monitor right there. Can those inside linebackers step up in coverage? And then if Bo Nix limit the turnovers, you got, like we always talk about, like everything is not perfect, but you got to, against Buffalo, you got to play a perfect game. You cannot allow them to take momentum early. You can't allow a fumble. You can't just allow an error throw for an interception. That just sucks out the momentum out of your team. And in games like this, you have no room for error. So it's going to come down to how the inside linebacker is going to handle coverage and containing the running backs in the passing game. That's one area. And can Bo Nix limit the turnovers? He's done a good job at it over the course of the season, but that's right there. You gotta limit those mistakes. You gotta limit the mental errors, and that also goes with the penalties too. The Broncos killed themselves with penalties this year, so it's not just not a whole Bo Nix turnover thing, but like it's just those mental errors you just can't afford. You can't afford a false start or illegal contact. And we've seen it on both sides of the ball. Even like in the finale, Quinn Miners gets penalized, and they had to go into halftime to settle for a field goal after Bo Nix's 29-yard scramble, put him right at the goal line. That right there, you cannot do. You cannot do that against the Bills in a playoff situation, in a playoff game in Buffalo. So that's right there. You got to limit the mental errors, and you got to be mindful of those running backs in coverage.
Parker, I'll ask you, because Ryan's mentioned it. One thing I hate when teams get into playoff games is they get so afraid of what the other team does well. And like you mentioned, Josh Allen's great. There's going to be a point, though, where you just do what you do best. Where you do best. We play man coverage. We do it well. We get pressure. We do that really well. Because I thought against Baltimore, they tried to do stuff they weren't comfortable with, and they got blitzed. It didn't help with the turnover. But Parker, would you rather see them go down as, this is who I am as a fighter? I do a hook. I'm going to get to my hook. This is who I am. Or reinvent themselves with, hey, he's never seen the lefty. He's never seen the south. Every time I hear that, it makes sense. I never see teams execute it other than a few Belichick teams with the Patriots.
Yeah.
What would you rather see them do in Buffalo?
Well, I think they have to play aggressive. I mean, especially defensively. And that's like, I think one of the things that you sort of sense from Sean Payton after a couple of those games where they really struggled defensively was we cannot play this way. Like, we cannot play, so much zone. We cannot sit back. It happened against the Chargers too, where,
Yep.
And the teams that are best equipped, I mean, I think this is sort of a universal thing. The teams that are best equipped to handle anything offensively in the NFL are teams with quarterbacks that can beat you in a lot of different ways, beat you with their arm, beat you with the legs, and teams that have run pass balance. Like, it's not rocket science when you look at who has given the Broncos fits this year, Baltimore and the Chargers twice. And part of that is just the run pass balance. The Chargers didn't run the ball much late in the year, but then, especially when you're talking about the balance of offensive options too, that was Cincinnati's thing. Pat Surtain did incredible work on Jamar Chase, and it's just the level of talent across the board then is still difficult to deal with. So, yeah, I mean, I think you have to play aggressive. I'll be interested to see how they deploy Surtain because, like Ryan said, there's not the you put him on one top guy and then let the rest filter down. That's not really how Buffalo's built. So, I just think they have struggled when they've asked their linebackers. You saw it against the Chargers with Ladd McConkey over the middle. When they ask their linebackers and safeties to do too much in coverage, they've gotten themselves in trouble. And are you going to let Josh Allen out and he's going to pick up 20, 25 yards a couple times? Yeah, probably, but I think when the chips are down, you'd rather go down that way than, letting guys run open over the middle of the field. And I mean, it's easy to say that too. Hey, let's go down doing what we're doing best. And if Josh Allen picks up 3 3rd and 10s with his legs, you're going to be looking at it saying why do they keep playing man and letting them, scoot out of the pocket and get first downs? That's what good teams do. They put you in binds. So, but no, I
think you put a spy on him. You put a spy on him.
Put a spy on him. Let the linebackers cover. But I think you have to. I think when the chips are down, when it's playoff time, I tend to agree with you. I mean, you go into it saying we're going to do what we do best and see if they can beat it.
I would say this, and I agree with both of y'all point. They got it. I think this is not a situation where you're going to have to do what you got to do best. And if that's man coverage and you just trust Nick Bonito and Jonathan Cooper to have the game of their life against a really good Buffalo offensive line, then you got to do that. Because going back to that Baltimore game, they played Lamar Jackson faced zone on 82.6% of his dropbacks. And on those dropbacks, he completed 13 for 15 passes, 260 yards, and 2 touchdowns against Denver zone.
That seems good.
He really, and the thing is, and Vance Joseph mentioned it in his presser going into that game was I think they spent so much time worrying about Lamar Jackson, the running game, containing the running game, containing Derrick Henry, to the point I think Lamar Jackson said, you know what, I'm just gonna tear you guys apart through the air, and that's what he did. And I think even Vance Joseph admitted after the game, he went away from what he done. He does the defense does best, and we saw that last year. He explained it last season. There were times last year when the defense struggled. He wasn't doing what he does best as a coordinator. If you got to this point as one of the best defenses in the league, doing this type of scheme, you gotta trust. You have to trust your guys. You gotta trust your scheme to go against you. Of course, you're gonna make adjustments. That's part of football. But don't drift away from it. I'll rather see the Broncos lose, doing what they do best on defense than taking themselves out the game by trying to do something else. I think you're just gonna have to go down swinging like Troy Parker said. You gotta just go down swinging what you do best, and that's going to be the key here in this game.
It's going to be interesting then offensively. Obviously Bo Nix has played well. Obviously he's done a lot of good things for the Broncos so far this season. I've come to the point now, Troy, where you don't always know exactly what you're going to get from him. He still had some of the rookie up and downs. He had that stretch against Cleveland, Indy, and Vegas where it wasn't. The numbers kind of dipped there for a little bit. And then obviously he's got 9 touchdowns and 1 interception the last 3 games. A little bit of, it's a feel-good game there to close the season. But aren't we sort of to the point where, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that you assume it's going to be all good, but I sort of have got to the point with Bo Nix where more than anything, I'm just sort of like, I'm intrigued to see how he handles the next thing, because he's handled most things pretty darn well so far. And so then to put him in this stage and throw him in there. And then I think there's this too. I mean, like, legitimately, I'm not saying the Broncos are going to the Super Bowl, but legitimately from here, the path to New Orleans for the Broncos could very well be Bo Nix against Josh Allen and then Patrick Mahomes and then Lamar Jackson. I mean, like, that's just life in the AFC. So it's sort of remarkable to watch, you know, to go into this playoffs and say, okay, Bo, like, you know, let's see how quickly you can put yourself not on the same level as a player with those guys, but in the conversation of like, hey, I've got a team to be reckoned with too, and we're going to be here for a while.
I mean, and that's where the biggest difference when you see Bo Nix as the quarterback of this team, like the belief he's created from his teammates. That's that's part of it. He takes care of the football and he doesn't take sacks. So those are two hallmarks, as you guys know, of good quarterback play. Now, some will say that sounds like a game manager. The best quarterbacks do manage the game. Let's be honest here, because they take care of the football. But when you look at Nix, to your point, where have we seen him overwhelmed? Outside of the first few games where I thought Sean set him up to fail against Seattle, and then Pittsburgh, he was running around for his life. You know, he got out of – but since you take away the first 4 games, he has been really good. Like, I did this thing yesterday when I'm comparing Bo Nix to Josh Allen. And listen, I'm not comparing him to Josh Allen. I'm not. But it's interesting that over the last 13 games of the season, Nix has 31 total touchdowns, 28 passing, 2 rushing, 1 receiving, and 8 picks, 68.3 completion percentage. Final 13 games for Josh Allen, 31 touchdowns, the same number, 21 passing, 10 rushing, 6 picks, 62% completion. I mean, what I'm saying, the kid's playing well. That's my point here. Like, you can extrapolate anything you want to say, well, sometimes he struggles after a mistake. So, but the overall aggregate will tell you from after those first 4 games, you can pull from anywhere and get a stretch where he's playing pretty well. And at times he's playing great, and he's the reason they're in games or have a chance to win games. Now, the next level of this is doing it with the bright lights. And even Lamar has struggled with this, and Ryan knows this way better than I do. He's a Hall of Famer, but at some point, as a quarterback, you have to play your best when it matters most, and that specifically for that position is the playoffs. It's not always fair, but that's what you're graded on. So to your point, Parker, I am intrigued. I would have told you, after the first month, like, Bo in the playoffs, whoa. They're going to have to run the ball 45 times and win 17-14. Well, now they're averaging 32 points a game over the last month of the season. They've got a legitimate offense now. So I'm curious. Now, Buffalo is not a great place for your first game in the postseason, but it just doesn't feel like, oh, my God, they're going to Buffalo, they're going to lose 40-10. It feels like, you know what? If they stay close, they got a shot because this kid doesn't do dumb stuff. And the one X factor is that he's a better athlete than people expect. He's not Josh Allen, the runner, the size. He's faster than Josh. I mean, I watched Josh a lot in college. He's just a brute. He's 6'5", 240, and he likes contact. Bo is just fast. He just gets outside, and if he's not one of the top 5 fastest players on the roster, I'd be surprised, honestly.
Oh, I think he probably is, yeah.
I don't know about a 40 in shorts but in pads, football fast. I bet Ryan does this for a living. I bet he's one of their top 5 fastest dudes. And so I love the idea. And he's got this white hot competitiveness. That's the thing behind the scenes people tell you. He hates to lose. And anytime I've ever coached a kid, covered a player, the great ones that I could count on hate to lose more than they love to win. And they're so driven by it, it's almost a healthy obsession. That's how you win. You get guys like that where it matters so much that it pulls the inertia of the group with them. And so I'm excited about it. Is it going to happen this year? Probably not. But it does. You at least see the semblance of the puzzle pieces of how it could happen.
I think one thing about Bo Nix, I think what's good about this team going to the playoffs this year instead of waiting, you look at the quarterbacks Denver's going to face to get to a Super Bowl during Bo Nix time here. You got Lamar, you got Joe, you got Mahomes, you got Josh Allen, and Justin Herbert. And I'm trying to think, am I missing anyone else?
CJ Stroud. I mean, going down the list, CJ
Stroud.
Stroud.
CJ Stroud. And the thing is about these guys is none of them are 30 years old.
Yeah.
That's the crazy part about it. None of these guys are 30 years old. These guys are in their 20s and at the height of their careers right now. And we have a lot of football left with a lot of these guys. And I think for Bo Nix going to this playoff now, it gives Sean Payton, it gives Bo Nix, it gives the organization as a whole is, all right, where are we at? Where is he at compared to these guys? So we will know. It kind of sets a blueprint for moving forward. How can we maximize this opportunity? So I'm intrigued to see how he handles this postseason moment. And I think it's good for him to do it as a rookie. Because like I said, you can see, all right, where is he at now? All right, if he goes in there and balls and balls out and they still lose, you walk away like, oh man, we got something here. We're just gonna have to build around it, even if they pull off an upset. Like that's key right there. And against in the AFC is that's what you're gonna have to deal with every year. If you win your playoff team every year, this is what you're gonna have to deal with. You're going to have to go to Buffalo. You're going to have to go to Baltimore. You're going to have to go to KC. So let's figure this out now. But yeah, I'm excited because Bo Nix has played some really good football. He has surprised me a bit. I didn't know he was. I knew he was a fit for Sean Payton, but if you would have told me he would have had 29 touchdown passes, and he spent the first half of the year with Lil Jordan Humphrey as wide receiver number 2 for him, I would have said, well, like, I would have laughed. I just didn't expect. I'm just looking at, like, when you look at the overall talent, you're like, all right, how is he going to do this? And he's done it, and he's done it in a way where this team has won 10 games and are in the playoffs. So there's a lot of good. There's a lot of good to take away from Bo Nix's rookie year, and I think, and to Troy's point, he doesn't make a ton of mistakes. He doesn't look frazzled compared to the first 2 weeks a year where it's like everything's just like everything was just a mess for him. And this is some guy I think they have a lot of trust in, and I think there's someone you can trust going to a playoff game like this. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles Buffalo, because he's going to have to do this if he is their franchise quarterback, and this 10-7 year is what the Broncos expect to see moving forward. It's moments like Sunday is where he's going to have to handle, and I think it's going to be exciting to see.
There's not really nobody's going to say this week because they want to go to Buffalo and win, but regardless of what happens, whether you win a game or 2 games or go all the way, or if they're one and done in the playoffs, like having this team in a relatively young core and a group that mostly is going to be, back next year or potentially back next year. It's really good to experience, to see it and say, okay, I know what it looks like. I know what it feels like. As you prepare to try to then get back going into the future. Obviously, the future can wait at this point. That they're all in on trying to get it done this year, but that's another element to it. Is just that you want the experience of playing in the postseason. It helps you the next time you play in the postseason. So before we go, go ahead.
Real quick, I was talking to Nate Jackson about that, former Broncos player, and I've talked to players about that. There is a different level of speed in the postseason.
Yeah.
Just like from preseason to regular season and regular season to postseason. And you can't understand it until you experience it. I watched it with my own son's baseball team. My junior year, they go to the NAI World Series, 2 and done, got smoked. And they literally were wide-eyed and happy. They were never happy to be. Then the next year, they won the national championship because they got there, and you could just tell it was totally different mindset. And that's why those experiences. Now, every once in a while you get a team that just doesn't care and they go all the way through, but they're usually incredibly talented. But I just think there's such an advantage to experience this. Yep. The environment, going against a great quarterback, going on the road, and you might get smoked. You might, but who cares? You have to learn. You have to learn. And they're so young that now, again, if we're saying 3 years from now that, they're 10-7 and hope they beat Buffalo and they're a wild card, that's a disappointment. But This has been, I think, they've set themselves up a year ahead of schedule for this. You've bought a year ahead of schedule.
Yep, no doubt. Yeah, I think you're right. And it's like the thing about the playoffs is the bedeviling part of it, right? Is like even if week one after the preseason, the speed of the regular season catches you a little bit off guard, like you've got 17 more weeks where you acclimate to it. And the faster you do it, the better, obviously. But in the playoffs, it's like you might get the one shot, and then it's like, oh man, and then you got to wait a year or 2 years or 5 years or whatever before you get another shot. So it'll be interesting to see how quickly they can settle in and play on Sunday. One other note just before we go, and then we'll do predictions quick. We're getting to that point in the year, obviously, where there's requests going out for coaching searches that are going on around the country. After this game between Wednesday and Saturday of next week, Vance Joseph's set to interview with the Jets. They're interviewing a bunch of people. And then we'll see. I think we can cover this, pardon me, after the season too. But there'll be a bunch of guys, Davis Webb, maybe Jim Leonard. Could be, you sort of like go all the way down the list. Jamar Cain and Michael Wilhoit could be in this conversation too. The Broncos have a bunch of guys that other teams will be interested in talking to about promotions. And so that's what happens when you win. After last season, you're sort of like, nobody's going anywhere. They let a couple guys go. When you win, teams want to talk to your coaches. And so there'll be quite a bit of that over the next few weeks. We'll cover all of that in more depth after the season ends and once those interviews really sort of get going. So before we go, guys, is this the last game week podcast we do this season? Predictions, Ryan, we'll start with you.
It's sad to say I do believe so. I got the Bills winning 28-20. I think the Broncos are come out with some momentum. I won't be surprised they jump out to let's say like a 10-0 lead early. But I think the Bills offense just too balanced, and it's just I feel like Denver's inside linebackers are going to have some issues against this offense on Sunday. I think that's going to be the biggest key there. So I'm going to rely on Josh Allen, someone who's had tremendous success from individually from the number standpoint in the postseason, and I think he's going to lead his team past the Broncos 20-20. Broncos they will play some inspiring football, especially early, but their offense as a whole is just there's too much they have to worry about. I don't think they'll be able to handle that on Sunday.
Troy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be competitive. The Bills, they have a history of choking in the playoffs, but not in this round. They choked out against the Chiefs, a game they should. Josh Allen's had games in the wild card round where he's had more touchdown passes than incompletions. He plays well early, and they're not asking him to be Captain America as much as they used to, although I think he'll fall back into that habit. That's where it gives you a chance with maybe a red zone turnover part. But ultimately, I just think they just don't have enough this year. I see them losing 27-20 in a game where you feel like, they were in it, that you can take a lot from it, but you walk away saying, you know what? The reason we said they needed a tight end and they needed another receiver, and the reason they needed maybe a true bell cow back, all those things show up on the biggest stage. I think that will be the takeaway that, man, they're really good. I don't know if they overachieve. Maybe this is who they are, but they lack skill players, and that's going to come into focus here. But I do. I mean, again, Buffalo's undefeated at home if memory serves, and it's just not a place where you win. But there's so much pressure on them. It would shock me if they upset. It would be a shocking result, but I wouldn't be completely surprised. But I can't pick it. There's no way. I have the Broncos lose at 27-20.
Yep, I got 27-17, right? Same kind of game. You do some good things, but eventually, like, you're left thinking, oh, that's what it looks like. I think that's kind of the way it ends up going. Well, one way or another, it's going to be fascinating. Broncos back in the playoffs for the first time since Super Bowl 50. We will have full coverage for you all the way through thanks for listening. It's denverpost.com/Broncos. See if I can butcher that any worse. denverpost.com/Broncos for all the latest. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. That's Ryan. That's Troy. I'm Parker. We will talk to you next